Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. So I watched the final installment called The Children from Childhood's End on Syfy channel, and here's my report on it. Now, I'm not going to go over all the details of this episode as much as I did for the first two episodes, but I do want to touch on a couple of themes that were blatant. Now, first off, in this finale, the children begin to display telekinesis, telepathy, psychic powers, and other supernatural abilities. And the concept was that the children were part of the evolution into a collective hive mind or collective consciousness called the Overmind. And the overlords had reached their peak of evolution, but for some reason, they were not allowed to ascend in totality to the Overmind. It kind of reminds me of the fall of Lucifer and this idea that Satan is unredeemable, but that's only a shade of what's going on in the story. The overlords were the assistants of mankind and allegedly of many worlds in the universe to make this transition from a normal lower civilization to joining the collective consciousness or the Overmind. Now, in the previous episode, at the end, we saw a special child named Jennifer being born to Jake and Amy Gregson, and we knew that she was the catalyst for this transition of man. But the overall philosophy or philosophical quandary that is presented, which ends with the destruction of the earth and all of mankind as we know it, left me wondering what all the levels and meanings were part of the story. But before we dig into that, let me just show you a couple of moments that were not surprising if you've studied these topics, but nevertheless blatant in their imagery. Now, early in the episode, Milo is still seeking to find out what's going on with the children. In the process, he interviews several of the children trying to find out what's going on. So what many have displayed as telekinetic abilities were also met with drawings, similar in nature. You know how kids draw out what they're seeing in their minds and stuff like that. Well, the drawing was of a pyramid with an all-seeing eye. In the real world here, this is the all-seeing eye of Horus, and it appears on the back of the dollar bill, and the occult knowledge held within this symbol is deep, and there's been several researchers who have delved into this hidden meaning and symbology and have come up with various explanations for what it stands for. But in this story of Childhood's End, at least in the sci-fi depiction of it, it was a reference to the Overmind, the collective consciousness or hive mind. And in this story, this collective consciousness is also even referenced as God at one point. But what I found particularly interesting is that when the children displayed their abilities, it kind of reminded me of New Age teachers. For example, David Wilcock, who before the enigmatic date of December 21st, 2012, was preaching that humanity will begin to display amazing abilities of telepathy, telekinesis, and psychic powers. Well, the same has been taught from the New Age community in one form or another, and it connects to, speaking to your ascended masters, or in Wilcock's case, it was the higher self, because in one of his early teachings, he said that we all contain within us the spark of God, and thus the higher God mind, and God is a reflection of ourselves and all this stuff. Well, these New Age concepts are sown throughout this final episode, and that's not surprising whatsoever. But the children, knowing that Jennifer is the first of the ascended evolving beings, begin all to chant Jennifer, Jennifer, all over the world. And they do this while raising their hand in the air. Now, what's interesting is that this really resembles the Sieg Heil of the Nazi Hitler era. And of course, Sieg Heil being a salute that meant hail victory, or we will win, or we salute the highest. So I found it interesting that that's the salute that was used in the story as well. And of course, it ties into this idea of a golden age that Hitler was trying to reach as well. So very fascinating stuff there, some overlap, and I'm sure when Arthur C. Clarke wrote this, he had some of this in mind because, of course, in the late 40s and the 50s when he was writing this, it was right after World War II. So in one scene when Milo speaks to Jennifer over the internet, sort of a Skype situation or a FaceTime situation, Jennifer is asked to look into the mirror, and Milo asks her, "What do you see?" and even flashes a piece of paper with the all-seeing eye pyramid and says, "What does this mean?" And Jennifer states, "I see all. I am all. The end begins." And what proceeds is Milo is given a vision of the Overmind and the end of the earth. And the following scenes is probably the most blasphemous aspect of this episode in terms of a deliberate twisting of biblical prophecy. Now, part of the storyline is that Jake, Amy, and the two kids, Tommy and Jennifer, move to a place called New Athens, and it's a place where people can live a life before the overlords came. And, they're trying to just find stability in their life and whatnot. Well, they're in this movie theater because, Saturday night movie night or whatever, and the whole town is there. They're watching this movie, and the reel stops, and Karelin appears on the screen, and really to the whole world, he pretty much states that the end has come. Here's what he says, quote, "People of Earth, I speak to you again for the last time. You have enjoyed decades of peace and prosperity, a golden age for man, but the sun sets on even the most glorious days, and it must now start slowly sink deep into the night for you. Do not condemn us, for we were tasked by a higher mind to oversee your evolution to a higher level of consciousness. It is your destiny, and the destiny of many worlds. You have grown accustomed to our presence, but we can be your guardians no more. Your children are no longer yours. In time, they will cease to be human. No more children will be born on Earth ever again. My hope is that humanity will go to its rest in peace." This whole thing is followed by young children ascending to the sky. Now, again, this is a twisting of the rapture event in the scriptures. 1 Thessalonians 4:17, "Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." Except in this case, the Lord is the Overmind, the all-seeing eye, and the aliens, the devils, are their helper. The aspect of evolving into the Overmind collective consciousness is also twisting another concept of the Bible of being changed and gifted eternal bodies upon our resurrection, of which Jesus Christ was the prototype for defeating death. 1 Corinthians 15:52 says, "In a flash, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed." Now, the guy who was in charge of New Athens, knowing that the children have ascended, is getting ready to nuke the town, and he runs to the church, and his own daughter had died despite the fact that, the overlords could have helped them. And so they show this, guy who is a little bit unstable or whatever. He had a nuke hidden in his house, and he was going to use it. And interestingly enough, in this church, when they're depicting him, they show the black and white tiled floors, which is a typical Masonic reference for duality, and just a reference for Masons in general, probably having some influence in this rendition of Childhood's End. Now, in the movie theater, Jennifer had ascended and they couldn't hold her back, but Tommy came back down and was allowed to stay a bit longer to say goodbye. But in the process, Jake and Amy run and look for this mayor guy of New Athens. They find him in the church, and he's drinking a bottle of wine and he's getting ready to pretty much die. Right outside the church, it shows Tommy telling his mother that he was only allowed to stay for a little bit and he has to go now. And when he ascends, they show the cross on the church and Tommy ascending to the sky, and behind him, many, many children also ascending. Now, again, I'm not going to go into every detail of the plot, but later on, Milo travels to the home planet of the overlords and gets to encounter the Overmind. The dialogue is something like this. Milo goes, "You're the Overmind." And the Overmind says, "A faint reflection of it. I am all, divisible and indivisible. I am the collective consciousness of the universe." Milo responds, "So we are God." The Overmind says, "No, the children are God, and they have left you as children must, and you must let them go as parents must. Only the children can become part of the whole." Then Milo responds, "It's an evolution into one mind. So we're finished, we cease to exist." And at that point, he sees his love, Rachel, who he left on Earth to visit the planet of the overlords. And it's just tragic. Every storyline that's followed has something to do with love and, relationships and stuff like that. But it all ends with death, which is, typical of this sort of story. But again, the narrative of the story is that the Overmind, or collective consciousness, or as they call it, God, had a plan for all the worlds in the universe to evolve and eventually give birth to a generation that would return back to the Overmind. But as a psychological thriller would have it, this brings up many questions. Was Arthur C. Clarke attempting to say that this was reality, or was he making a much more nefarious statement about the Bible and religion in general? In other words, was his goal to show that the God of which Christians worship and its prophecies are merely the worship of some sort of inevitable evil in the physical world, this Overmind, with its helpers being demon-looking aliens who assist worlds to evolve when really they're simply part of an overall program to harvest and feed this Overmind. Well, regardless of what turns out to be the true motive behind Clark and the childhood's end story, it appears the makers of this modern version of the story were well aware of the New Age concepts and the occult symbology, and definitely used it throughout. And the story ends with the total destruction of the Earth. Milo's the last man, and he reports the whole thing back to the overlords, and as they leave, you get a sense of nihilism, which I think was also part of this whole thing. Because when Milo's dying, he talks to Karelin and he tells him that he's scared. And Karelin tells him, it's okay, pay attention to my voice, it's totally natural. This death thing. It's just totally natural. But ultimately, as they're pulling away from the area where the Earth once stood, there was a sense of nihilism, which is this notion that there's a rejection of all religious and moral principles in general, and it's often a belief that life is meaningless. And that's really what this story pushes in so many ways, that even love was in the end meaningless because it's all destroyed. And unless you're becoming part of the collective conscious, you will cease to exist in all forms whatsoever. And so it's quite a depressing end, but I couldn't help but look at the jabs at biblical prophecy and the concept of the rapture and even the concept of one mind, which is interesting when you consider Revelation 17:13, when it talks about the 10 horns, the 10 kings, and it describes them as these are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. And maybe that was something that reflects on what might have been going on in the story as well. But let me know what you think. Again, you can watch this on your own on the Syfy website. And when I say I recommend you watch it on your own, I'm not recommending it as in promoting this story as something that's, good to watch or whatever. I'm merely saying if you want to watch it for yourself, do so. But do so knowing that they are pushing an agenda, they're pushing a worldview. There's a reason why it took 60 plus years to make this into a proper large-scale production. And so keep that in mind as you watch it, if you do decide to watch it. If not, it's okay. That's why I'm making these videos, so that you guys don't necessarily have to sit through everything, but you'll know that this sort of propaganda is out there. So share your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Hope you guys have an awesome day. God bless.